here because you want more. More engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the e-learning scenario design podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
Hi everybody, Anna Sabramowitz here. And this podcast, well, it's the last one of the year, so I thought I'd kick it off with that. Now, if you're wondering, this is your first podcast ever in this channel, and you have no clue who I am a scenario designer, and I help people write, design, craft, interview subject matter experts to craft amazing, engaging scenarios. And I'm really curious about what people do and how they do it and why they think certain ways. And so I think that is a skill set that helps me do what I do and be the best at it. So, if you didn't listen to the last podcast, what I'm really trying to do is figure out what are the qualities of a podcast that make it awesome to listen to, right? Why in the world would you listen to a podcast in the first place? And for me, it's things like, it gives me some useful info. It makes me feel like I'm smarter somehow, helps me integrate some new information or ideas, entertains me, shares some good stories. And I thought, okay, that's kind of what I want to do with this podcast, but also, why do I do it? What makes me want to do that? And I thought about that for a while, and I realized there's mainly two reasons. The first reason is that, okay, so I have to go back now and tell you about this person who's definitely influenced me, and the reason why I'm doing this podcast is because of the ideas that he's shared. I don't know if you've heard of Jordan Peterson, but he is the most famous Canadian right now. And one of the things he does is, he goes to different countries to do lectures. Right? And right now he's doing a lecture on the 12 Rules for Life, which I recommend you read. It is an amazing book. And he said that this is so cool because it's almost like it's really brave. When he does a lecture, he has a couple of points that he will touch on. But then what he does is he leaves it open for himself to explore that idea out loud, because he expects that he will be learning from it as he talks about that idea. So because he gets it out of his head, out into the world, he's able to, through the verbalizing of that idea, actually elaborate on it more, make more connections, think out loud, as they say. And in fact, every single time he does a lecture, he learns a little bit more about that topic because he explores it verbally. And not everybody has this gift. And it's a gift. And I'm trying to potentially figure out if this is something that I can do. I feel I can. And I've had actually, now that I've embraced this, because it's kind of scary not knowing what you're going to say, not just basically having a really rough idea of what you're going to talk about. But I've had certain epiphanies happen to me while I'm discussing certain topics. Things just click. And all of a sudden that now becomes more solid than being just in your head and then being, distracted by the multiverse of options that stick in your head. So it's almost like you're forcing it out through the filter, forcing these ideas out through the filter of your mouth and your language, which is also a constraint, right? There's no visuals that I can share with you that would represent what I'm saying. I actually have to verbalize all of my ideas, which is really cool. So hopefully that didn't go for too long as a tangent, but that's one of the things. And then the other thing is why I'm doing this podcast is to indoctrinate you, right? And you're like, wow, that's so sinister. And I actually don't think so. I think, to be honest, I think indoctrination and, propaganda has like a bad rep because it's always been used in association with things that are negative. But when you think about it, indoctrination is, for me, a way for you to get to know me, get to know my skill set, my mindset, my perspective, and then hopefully, or whatever, you decide if this is something that you're aligned with or you like it, and you stick around because I've indoctrinated you and you like the stuff that I'm saying and my perspective, and you think it actually is something that you find beneficial and helpful in your everyday work and life. And so, yeah, so that's why I'm doing it, because what really my goal is that if you enjoy this stuff, it helps your work. That's huge, because I can only have, when I work on projects, I can only have impact on one project at a time. This allows me to share my ideas with way more people. And also, if this is something that resonates with you and you like it, maybe one day we'll work together, right? And what will be cool is that two of us will actually kind of be on the same wavelength already. And when you know this from teamwork, if you already know the person, it's just so much easier to work with them because you get them, right? So that's cool. I think that's super awesome. So let's talk about just some ideas I've been jotting down for just what I think is really going to kill it in 2019. Like the kinds of strategies, the kinds of thinking that 2019 needs to have for us to have a kick-ass year. Okay, so let me just see. I actually wrote down a couple of these ideas, so it's not all, freestyle. So one of the things I think that has been a big epiphany for me in 2018 is the idea of mentors. And I don't know if I've talked about this, but I've been lucky enough to have mentors throughout my career. And it wasn't that they were like the kind of mentors that you assign. You're like, oh, here's your mentor. You join a company, you're now in this level of management. Here's your mentor, right? I didn't actually have any kind of opportunities like that. I know that my husband did. Like when he joined a company at a certain level, you were actually assigned a mentor, which was really cool. Because what happened is, if you know anything about, if you read about mentorship, leadership at a company develops, it's a mentor and a mentee relationship builds both people up and improves the skill set of both of those people. So mentorship is something that should be, I think, shouldn't be restricted to upper levels of leadership. It should be fostered at every level in a company, but how many companies actually do that actively? So that's a really cool concept, and I was kind of a little bit jealous. I was like, oh, I wish I could do that, but what's neat is that you can, if you want to, which is all up to you, find people that will mentor you. So there's two ways to look at that. I mean, I've definitely had colleagues that had, and it doesn't have to be somebody who is like, better at everything than you. It just, they have to have a quality that you admire and you want to build up in yourself. It could be things like public speaking, could be things like dealing with other people, could be things like the way they manage projects or teams, all kinds of things, right? How they give feedback, anything, right? There's great qualities. Everybody has either interesting perspectives or qualities that you can try to emulate. So if those people are not in your immediate, you don't have access to them, they're not in your office, or you work from home by yourself like I do, then you can find them online. There's lots of YouTube channels, people who talk about their daily experiences. You can reach out to people via email, on LinkedIn even, and say, can I talk to you, or do you mind being a mentor for me? Like, people will actually, especially in, not everybody, because I think a lot of people are actually really busy just actually being awesome, right? So they don't necessarily have the time to mentor, or they're just, that's just not what they want to do. However, there's lots of people out there that you can already reach out to and be in that relationship with. The other thing is, there are people, like, depending on what you're striving for, there's people out there who are really awesome at something that you want to be awesome at. So, and because they're really awesome and kicking butt in their own field, they might not actually have any time to talk to you or ever have they don't have the capacity to mentor, because they're actually trying to do that in their field, be the best. So, Michael Phelps, who's the Olympic swimming champ, if you said, Michael, I'm going to give you, $50,000 to mentor me, he'd say, I'd love to, but I actually have no time for that because I'm in the pool every day. So the thing is, you don't actually have to give up on that. What you can do is say, look at what he does every day. What makes him awesome? Maybe if I did the same things, I would also be awesome, just like Michael Phelps. Especially if you were into swimming. It's kind of easy to see what he does every day. What's I think most surprising to most people is people who are in the elite positions. They really are focused on executing the mundane. That's, to the rest of us, the mundane in the most awesome and consistent way ever. And I heard somebody say this recently. It's probably Sam Ovens who said in this video that when you look at the elite of our society, people who are achievers, people who are influencers, people who are not just, I'm not saying influencers in the social media sense, I mean people who are really doing great things for the world. Those people are really good at the mundane, and a lot of us get disappointed when we see that because we want it to be something unachievable and something out of our reach and something innate to them. Well, most times it isn't. So when you look at Michael Phelps and you look at his history, not an especially bright child, nothing really amazing about him, wasn't born with webbed feet or anything. Maybe he does have them, but that's not part of the story. But what does he do every day? He gets in the pool and he practices the drills that every novice does. He just does it every day. He doesn't skip days. And it's that consistency and persistence. And that's one of the amazing things about the world today, is that you can get a glimpse of what the world is like for somebody like that, and then model it yourself and become world class yourself, because you're able to now see what those people do every day to get there, which is really cool. What you can hear in the background right now is the soothing sound of a giant Pyrenees that one of my neighbors has. It's a terrifyingly huge and intimidating dog, and I love dogs, but he's huge. So there we go, mentors and modeling, right? That's huge. Find out who those people are and read the books about them, consume their content, find out everything about them, and then stop being the consumer of information, start being the applier of information so that you can make it work for you. Now, here's another thing, is this idea of mindset. And this has been almost like, if 2018 had a theme for me, it would be mindset. Because I realized I went to visit my mom. There was some medical stuff going on, and everything's okay now. But I remember when I visited her, there's this kind of an old volcano near her house. It's not active or anything. Don't worry about that. But it's just a giant hill. And I've been going there, obviously visiting her for years. But I never climbed that thing because I was always waiting on other people to come with me. And this last time that I went, I just decided I was going to go. And if somebody wanted to come with me, they could. But that was not a part of the decision. I was just going to go anyways. And I did. It was a hard climb. And I actually shot this like really heartfelt video about being up there and how all this time I had not climbed that mountain and gone there because those other people had decided that they didn't want to go, and somehow that made me believe that I needed them to be up there. It was a really cool experience. Where they were, where she is actually, her house is located near an area that gets forest fires every single year. It's pretty harsh. It's kind of like this California valley with grapes and red earth and things like that. And yeah, all the volcano happens around the volcano, not all the fire happens around the volcano. And so it was really cool. I was walking around while I was climbing. I was leaning on all these trees. It's pretty intense climb, and also the earth is very sandy clay, so you, like, if you're not paying attention, you basically end up like sliding all the way down. So here I am just climbing this thing, leaning on these trees, and then I realized, I looked up, the trees up to about like 1/3 of the way up from the bark, and the bark was really cool, are soot black because the fire that went through like the year before had burned up to that much, and the tree survived, which was really cool. It just makes you think about bark and how amazing these trees are, and obviously they're there and they're there still because those fires haven't destroyed them, because they have this bark that protects them, which was amazing to me. But one of the things I noticed is that then I thought, oh my gosh, how many times have I touched my face since I've touched these trees, because they leave soot on your hands, right? So then this family was approaching me, and I'm like, listen guys, I'm so sorry, but if my face is covered in soot, and they're like, listen, we already know, look at our children. Of course, they're showing me like their 4 and 5-year-olds, and here I am, this woman covered in soot, and they're showing me their children to appease, to relieve me. And I thought that's actually the opposite, because now I feel like a 4-year-old. But one of the things that happened up there is that I really thought about why there's been so many times that, and it's not always been professional, sometimes it's been personal, that I've let me and what people think and what people say and what other people do, and them giving me this permission to hold me back from doing what I wanted. And I thought about the fact that most times I hadn't even asked for the permission. It was this expectation that I had that made me think that they should know, that they should tell me that it's okay if I do this. And all that conversation was happening in my head. I didn't say, hey, I'm going to do this, and is it okay if I do this? I mean, it didn't even go that far. It basically just said, I have an idea, and people would say, oh, that's too hard, or that we don't do that around here, or whatever, or we don't have the technical expertise, blah, blah, blah. And I would just take that as a no. And the other thing that happened is I would, let's say, come up with some creative idea that I wanted to try, and I would say it, and people would say things like, be careful, or I don't know if that's a good idea, like maybe you shouldn't do that, or we've tried that, I don't think you're gonna. And I've been there so many times where every time I have a new idea, people say, oh, you better be careful, that's not gonna work. And this year I realized why they say that. And I realized that it has nothing to do with my idea, and it actually has nothing to do with me. Every single time somebody said, be careful, or, oh, that might not work, or we've already done that, they're just voicing the stuff that's going on in their own head, the doubts they have about themselves. And that is something that I've learned from is somebody called Brooke Castillo. She always talks about how if somebody is holding you back or being angry with you for no reason, or they're lashing out or they're hurting you, that is not a representation of what you're doing most times. That is a representation of what's going on inside of them and the demons they're fighting. If somebody's cruel to you, it's because there's some bad going on inside and they can't deal with it and they're taking it out on you because you happen to be the closest person, right? And it's hard to separate yourself from that. It's hard to say, oh, this person doesn't believe in me, this person. No, guess what? You got to have that superior empathy. You got to be like the next level of aware that when somebody acts in a way that undermines you, they're not undermining you. They're really trying to justify to themselves why they haven't been the one coming up with the great ideas, why their, husband is, not taking them out on dates or whatever. Like they're working through something on their own. And you just have to be aware enough to distance yourself, become the observer, and say, this is not about me. Because if this was about me, this person would be like, hey, you know what? You want to go for it? You go for it. It's your thing. Do it. Makes you happy. Go for it. Like those are the people you want to be around who are like, listen, I don't know, but if you want to do that and you want to challenge yourself and you want to grow in that way and see where it goes, go for it. I'm with you. And those are the people you want to stick around with because they are, it's not like you need their permission. It's not like you even need their encouragement. You might not even say anything. You're not asking, right? You're just saying what you're going to do, stating it in the most powerful and confident way you can because you don't even know sometimes what you're doing, but you want to try things. So mindset's huge, and believing that you can try things and fail and be okay with it because that's just one more way that you figured out things don't work and now you have that experience. Now you can help other people saying, oh, you should avoid that issue and I'll tell you why, but here's the other ways I didn't try. Why don't we try all the other ways that I haven't tried yet? Now there you can be that's how expertise gets developed, by trying all the things that didn't work. And now you can help people avoid those things and say, you know what, I tried this and here's all the variables that were in place. Maybe if you tried it this way, it would work. You can be the person who helps. You can be the person who provides an alternative perspective. And that's one of the things I love too is like when you're starting on a project. I learned this from Michael Kahneman. He talked about how every project should have a post-mortem, which is you do, what went well, what didn't go well, and you should actually do that very often, even if I think a project is not even finished yet. It's like what worked last week, what didn't work last week. But also, before you begin a project, start a pre-mortem, because there's very few things that have been tried that haven't been tried by other people yet. So what if you are ignoring that? And you could actually hit the ground running by having a few things already solidified and known, some knowns already. So a pre-mortem is getting a bunch of people who maybe have worked on similar projects, people who are experts in the field in other areas, and get them to talk about those other projects. What are the obstacles they face so that you can anticipate that stuff, so you can have a better head start. That's the kind of stuff that I wish I'd done more when I first started, because I got into some software projects at my company that were like, 18 months of development. And I was like, I know people have done this before. Why are we trying to invent the wheel with custom software when I know other companies have intranets, other companies have software training, other companies have employees who tell them how things work, right? And so I find that's one of the biggest roadblocks, is that companies try and invent things in-house for the wrong things. Like they don't leverage talent that's in-house for the specific skill sets that make that company special, but they will trudge through and create all this work for things that aren't really special to them. And they'll just keep on buying this vanilla stuff for like, or developing this vanilla stuff for the lower rungs. Well, that could actually be purchased really quickly. And the elite things, they don't focus on those details that make that company awesome. And maybe, I mean, that's why I think scenarios are actually something that's just untapped right now. And I think everybody should be tapping into it as much as possible. Because what happens is you have all these, there's definite commonalities when it comes to things like ethics, when it comes to things like, how to do stuff, how to edit things, blah, blah, blah. But then when it comes to things like how do we deal with our customers? How do we sell to our customers? How do we solve these kinds of issues? Those are the things, or let's say I was recently reading the book First Principles by Ray Dalio. I think that's how his name is said. And he was talking about extreme transparency, and which is really cool but scary at the same time, right? For a lot of people. Heck, I mean, even in life, right? Imagine if you were extremely transparent with everybody in your life. I'd have I think I'd be exactly where I'm at, except, sometimes some people would be, would call me a little less because I wouldn't be putting up with their stuff. I think we give a lot of leeway to our family and friends, let's just say. So what he said is that there was these two leaders, and they had, something had happened at the company. I don't remember the details exactly, but what happened is that one person dealt with it a certain way. I don't know if it was like an employee transgression or something like that. And then the other leader said they handled it the wrong way and called them out on it. But they both believed they were right. And instead of saying this person's right, this person's wrong, Ray had the scenario sent out to all the employees, and with the two outcomes, and they could decide who was right. And based on what the decisions were and the conversations that ensued from that scenario, their policy was changed. And that's a great way to bring everybody on board with the same kinds of mindsets, decisions, and to show people the consequences of those actions, which is what's wonderful, is that all of a sudden a conversation or a decision that was made in a small pocket of the company now is something that everybody else can benefit from, right? It didn't happen in isolation. I didn't have to hear it at the water cooler. It's something that is a part of our ethos, a part of our modus operandi. We know this is, when something like this comes up, we're all on the same page about this, which is really, really cool. And that's why I think that's where you can seriously leverage the scenario stuff. And then the other thing that I'm really going to focus on this year, and I've been becoming more and more aware that it's my duty, is to become a more practical and honest with the feedback that I provide. And the reason I'm saying this is that, so years back, I handed in something. I gave my boss I think it was like some sort of a workbook or something like that. And it was supposed to be printed. And the workbook had one of the table columns was actually set up. So one of the workbook columns was actually set up so that because of the way the text was structured, it actually bumped to the next page. And at that point, the way we had way back when, I didn't actually have a way to turn anything into a PDF. It was like you had to have like special Adobe software, right? It wasn't just a plugin. So I had sent it off to my graphic designer, and then the final product was then presented to my boss. My boss comes in and looks at it, and she had it open to this page, and she's like, look at this. This creates an extra page with an extra line. And I said, yeah, oh, well, the graphic designer should have caught that. They should have fixed that. She's like, well, it's the text you wrote that made it go to the next page. And I said, why are you, like, it's, it's not my fault. And she said, you give me shit, I give you shit. And I learned a very, very valuable lesson there. The lesson is that you should take extreme ownership of every single step of that process. And for me, I was still learning things, but seriously, I should have owned that. I should have handed that off so that all that graphic designer had to do is do their job, which is not copywriting, but, create a beautiful PDF. And then that would be that. And so years later, I remember working at this, it was a small team. I don't know, it was like 10 of us or something. And we had this amazing graphic designer work for us. And he put together these really cool posters, promotional posters. And we had them printed. They were freaking beautiful. He did a great job. And then when he left, there was a bit of a circle around one of the posters, and some of the people were standing around going, yeah, look at this goofball, look at that, he misspelt this word on this poster. And I said, well, who sent him the headlines? And somebody did. And I said, is it that way, the way that it was on the way it was sent? And they said yes. And I said, well, then it's not his fault. And they said, well, he should have done a spell check. And I'm like, no, he's working in like Illustrator or some sort of Adobe Photoshop. There is no spell check. He takes your words that you gave him and he puts them into these beautiful graphics. And the person who is to blame is the person who sent him, who was the wordsmith, because that was their part. That was the part they were supposed to ensure that was right. And that also is a lesson to me, that you got to put back the ownership where it belongs. And so sometimes that's you, and sometimes you got to own up to that, and you got to make sure that every single part of that process is as good as you can make it. And if somebody isn't performing the way you need them to, then you need to own that and replace them. And own the fact that you didn't give them enough feedback and you didn't give them enough direction that they knew what they were supposed to do. And if you did all that and they're still not performing up to par, then it is your job to get a new person who will be able to deliver for you. Because in the end, your workbook will be delivered to the boss and you'll be responsible for how it looks. And saying, well, Jim didn't do... No, that just makes you look foolish, right? So you got to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who can deliver on that. And if they can't, you get new people. That's just how it works. And so the other thing is, if I see something that, I want my work to be critiqued, and the biggest critics, the best critics are my learners, my students, the people who get to see it, who get to experience it. And I love that. They really don't care about your feelings. They just care about the results. And that's one of the things that you also have to do, is that realize that your team, the people around you, they're, every time they're looking at your work, they're thinking about how, they're kind of negotiating probably with themselves, unless you work at a place of true transparency where people are just absolutely dedicated to high standards. Those people around you are probably calculating, the honesty of their feedback versus the relationship that they're going to have with you later on. And if you work at a place and with a team, let's say, that understands that critique has everything to do with making you better and making that final product better, then that's amazing. But if you're sensitive, or they're the kinds of people that don't want that kind of feedback either, they're not going to dish out the real stuff. They're not going to tell you your stuff's boring. They're not going to tell you your stuff's ugly. They're not going to mention the page with an extra extra line that eats up a whole extra page in the workbook. They're not going to tell you those things because that's not what you've asked for. And you have to keep on asking for that kind of stuff. And also, our world is full of that kind of mediocrity where everybody gets a golden star for just showing up. And that doesn't help our profession, because the thing with instructional design is we don't have that really critical peer review process. And a lot of times I talk to people who are like, oh, I never get to actually work with a subject matter expert. I just get to work from a workbook manual. I'm like, well, how can you put together compelling scenarios when you have no clue what the consequences are going to be or how people think? That's not in a manual. So you have to talk to a subject matter expert. And I don't want to, if you can't talk to subject matter expert, it's because you haven't reached out, you haven't pushed hard enough, because they're out there. Even if it is talking to a top performer, those people want to talk to you, those people want to share info. So there's no excuse around that. Also, if you put together stuff that really is boring and dry and sucks and you don't even want to go through it, why in the world would anybody else want to? And so if you're putting out stuff like that and you send it my way, I'm going to tell you that, I don't care if that's one of the things is people say, oh, my audience is different. No, they're humans. And people, when people go to the movies, you don't have the 3 different filters on the same movie, because some people like black and white, some people like color, and some people like 3D. People who like action movies, right? And there are all kinds of people who don't. But if you're talking about learners and visuals and interesting stories, that's kind of universal. Yes, there will be outliers, but if you have a chance to engage, like, let's say 15% more people because you included a compelling story and actually took the time to make it awesome, that's fabulous. Because most of the time, the things that we put out there that I've seen are just horrendous, and nobody cares. Nobody wants to go through it. Nobody's interested. You haven't sold them. You haven't indoctrinated them to believe that this is actually helpful to them. And then it's all for nothing. You just basically just wasted that time on nothing. So imagine just doing less things, but making them better and testing them sooner, so that you can get the kinds of feedback from learners, which is so, it's sometimes very painful. And I've gotten some really harsh feedback, but then you're like, wow, if some people are crazy. So, you have to realize there will be people who will give you feedback and you're like, well, they wrote it in all caps. That might mean they're crazy. However, if there's a trending theme, then gosh, that's fantastic. One of the books that I recommend you also check out this year to really get the right kind of feedback on what you're delivering is Will Thalheimer's book and it's called Performance Focused Smile Sheets. And if nothing else, it will actually show you that the kinds of data and information you're gathering about how to improve the training that you're providing is actually BS. Like most companies, the kind of surveys they put out to gather data, the Likert scale is absolutely pointless, and in fact wastes people's time. It doesn't actually add any value or give you any kind of qualitative data that actually you can use. So if you want to get pro at this, and I'm thinking that because you're listening to this, you want more than entertainment, you actually want to take it to the next level, become world class. And when I say world class, I really mean that. Like, there's room for you. There's so much room in this world for that in any kind of industry, especially instructional design. This is the place, really. We need it. So if you want to get good at it, get that book and read it. You will enjoy it. So that's Will Thalheimer's book for performance-focused smile sheets. It will probably blow your mind a little bit. Actually, most of the things that he puts out are quite fantastic. You just have to actually apply them, like most things in life. So let me see what else did I note here that I thought I wanted to explore mentally with you guys. Hope you enjoyed this one. Just stop being timid and just really start being honest about what you want, about who you are, about even with yourself. I think that's the first place it begins. Is we are very harsh on other people. We want to tell them how to do things. We easily criticize other people's work, other people's efforts, but where we need to start is right now is just looking at your own stuff. Look at your own desk. Look at your desktop. Is it focused? Do the things you produce share excellence? And if they don't, you have no room to talk about anybody else. And that's one of the things I also learned, which is going to be my last point for this really long 2018 last podcast, is this idea of judging. And I realize now that the reason, and this comes from the study of one of my mentors who has taught me this. His name is Sam Ovens. So one of the things he said, and it resonated with me and I totally got it, is the reason we are afraid that other people will judge us is because we judge. And the minute you stop judging other people, you stop pretending that you know what they should do because you don't understand anything that's going on in them, inside them. I mean, you barely understand what's going on inside you, right? So whatever decisions people make or whatever they're doing, it's not on you to judge that because you can't. And if they do something wrong, of course, I'm not talking about like we can't judge somebody for hurting somebody else or whatever. No, like there's laws, right? I'm talking about that everyday stuff where you see other people share their work, or you see somebody else do something, or you see somebody dressed a certain way, or somebody say something, and you make stories and assumptions and you go down a narrative, right, about them. The minute that happens, you fall into the trap of externalizing and focusing on, the things that person should do, versus looking inwards and saying, how am I being the example here? How am I being an example to my peers? How am I being an example? And it's funny because we'll say, that person put out something terrible. We don't give them a reason on how to improve it, a way to improve it. We don't show them an example that could help them. Those are the things we have to start doing. And those are also the things we have to start doing by ourselves. One of the things that I heard, and it's one of my favorite quotes, it says the best way to complain, like if you're seeing and everything's terrible out there and people are putting out boring stuff and people at your company aren't doing good stuff, the best way to complain is to build something. And that's a designer kind of motto. And those are the mottos of people who are actually making change in the world. When you think about somebody like Elon Musk, he could be just going around bitching about the fact that, people are still driving cars with oil and standing out there and picketing at the oil pipelines. Or what he did is he actually just patented a electric car and gave that patent to every single other company so that, Nissan could now also make an electric car. So the best way to complain and potentially fix a problem is to build something yourself. One, that'll teach you humility because you'll know how hard it is to actually solve a problem. And two, you'll now have experience that you could share with other people. That's value. That's true value. And then the other thing about judging, I think it was just I lost my other train of thought, but really it was just that the minute you lose this people should do this and people should do that and start focusing on where you're at, this is the other point I was thinking about, is that there's a lot of people who talk to me, they're saying, I'm in a bad place, I've they're suffering. And I'm not saying that their suffering is not real. It is real. They're stuck, they're frustrated, they're doing things they're not proud of. They feel like they're on a hamster wheel. It's just, it's hard. Like, sometimes life gets hard and overwhelming, and I get that. I've been there. But I have to tell you, and this almost feels counterintuitive, the way to overcome that is to stop feeling your own pain and actually go out and help somebody. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, feels counterintuitive, but I have this friend, and over the past probably 8 years, I've seen this friend completely deteriorate, like emotionally, even physically. And it's every single time we don't live close to each other, but every single time I see this friend, I see them getting worse. They're and you probably have friends like this where you see them and they're putting on weight, they're getting more depressed, they're maybe losing their relationships, their house is a worse mess, they're watching more TV, like things like that, and it's almost like for some reason we've accepted this idea that for some people, things are supposed to get worse, especially as they get older. For some reason, you're supposed to slow down and just start I don't know, just go lie in a box and wait for death to come. That's how some people think. And it's funny because if you bring that up, they get all indignant, but then you look around and you're like, but you're just trying to do less now. And every year you're trying to just be less. So when you are in a dark place, to get out of that dark place, you can't go inward, because when you go inward, you end up, it's like a downward spiral. It'll just pull you down and down and down, especially if you're in a bad place. So what you need to do is step out of that and be helpful and give assistance or help or comfort to somebody else. And the way this works is that when you start, it's funny because a lot of people say, I don't get support. I don't get the support I need. I don't get the encouragement I need. When you start from a place of need, you don't get what you need. But when you start from a place of giving, what's amazing is that if you start giving encouragement, the giving of encouragement actually ends up being within you, and now you're experiencing encouragement, even if it is something that's you're pushing out. But it is now encouragement that you're pushing out. It's the same thing with love. If you want, people are like, I don't get love. Nobody loves me. Well, are you giving love? Are you sharing love? The minute you give that love, the minute you give encouragement, the minute you give support, it's funny, but that's when things start to turn around. So I find people who are depressed, people who are alone, it's because they focus on their aloneness and their depression, and there's no way out of that. But if they start focusing on giving and helping somebody else who's also in a dark place, maybe that's when you start really getting yourself out of that jam. I'm not saying that's the only thing that you need to do. There's a lot more work, but just starting with looking outside yourself and saying, there's somebody else out there hurting, and I know what that feels like. Maybe I can help them a little bit. Or there's somebody out there who needs encouragement, and if I just show them what that's like, that'll be better, because I don't want anybody else to be as discouraged as I am. Maybe you can try that. So that's one of the things I learned this year, is to be not just more honest and stop judging, because everybody's got their own stuff going on in their head. Not to take things personally, because I realize everybody's got stuff going on in their head, and a lot of times it has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your character. It has nothing to do with your lovability. It has everything to do with them. So you just got to focus on making sure you're the best example for other people. You're living life in the way that you want it to be lived, because once it's gone, there's nothing. It's like that, right? So we got to make sure that every single moment you're living it the way you want. You, on your terms, have decided to live it. So I hope that is helpful to you, and you think about what I said, and it makes you reflect on what you're doing. Maybe send me a note, anna@annasabramowitz.com. And I hope you have a fabulous, kick-ass, dangerous, executing, making change like an animal, like the rock star that you are. You just have to let that rock star out and make it shine and kick butt, because we need you. We need you to join the army of awesome. All right, so take care, and I hope you have a wonderful 2019. Bye.
You're listening to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.